an orthopedic surgeon.
Before I begin the meeting, we do have a swearing in of an alternate. Bill Spellman was appointed for an alternate for a term ending on December 31st of 2023. Mr. Spellman, if you'd like to get up, and I think Trustee Augustine will swear you in.
You want to come to the front of the room? All right. I feel like we've done this before. You raise your right hand and repeat after me. I state your name.
I, William Spellman,
Do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of Ohio,
and the Constitution of the State of Ohio,
and will faithfully discharge the duties
and faithfully discharge the duties
of a zoning commission alternate
of a zoning commission alternate
for Hinckley Township,
for Hinkley Township,
Medina County, Ohio,
in Medina County, Ohio,
during my term on the zoning commission.
during my time in the zoning commission.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Great job.
Mr. Spellman has been on the zoning commission for quite some time in various capacities, including chair for a while. So we're very excited to have him back on the board to offer some additional wisdom. I'd like to call the zoning commission regular meeting to order on March 2nd, 2023 at 7 p.m. This meeting is being recorded for transcription purposes, and the written minutes and attachments, if any, will serve as the official record of this meeting. On behalf of our virtual audience, we ask the public joining us in person to approach the podium in the event that they would like to speak. They will need to announce their name and address prior to speaking. Additionally, we ask the audience to save personal conversation for after the meeting, as additional voices cause confusion for those attending virtually. Can we get a roll call, please?
Fisher,
Here.
Crew,
Here.
Marzullo,
Here.
Manley,
Here.
Engelmann.
Here.
In the audience are alternates Spellman and Machado. Trustee Augustine, Trustee Asherle, and Trustee Sweattick is virtual.
And Inspector Wilson is also in the audience.
Sorry. Thank you.
Perfect. Our first order of business is a review and approval of the regular meeting minutes from the February 2nd, 2023 meeting. Has everyone had an opportunity to review those? Are there any requested amendments? If there are no suggested amendments, I'll entertain a motion to approve
I'll make a motion. to
February
approve
2nd, 2023 minutes as written.
As written.
Motion by Crew, second by Engelmann. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All abstain. Thank you. Mr. Marzullo abstains. Minutes have been approved. Mr. Wilson, are you here for all of the topics, or did you specifically come for the discussion of the floor area living space
Thank you. I'm going to be here
for the entire meeting?
for the duration.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Then why don't we just go in order? I think that we'll only cover discussion items 1 and 2 within the new business section, but we'll see how tonight's discussion goes. So the first order of business is a discussion regarding the B1 district at Bellis and Hinkley Hills. And so at our last meeting, there was a request that we look at the table of permitting conditional uses within each of the B1 and B through B3 districts, and then look at what might be useful for that area of Hinkley, which is currently zoned B1, and see if it makes sense to rezone that to B2 or B3 to keep it within the B1 district, or to consider a fourth district. So let me pull up our regulations. I think I have a Word version of this.
Okay, is that on
67.
Trustee Asherle, can you either make me host or presenter so that I can share, or maybe I can, no. Thank you. Perfect. So I've pulled up the table as currently written, with the B1 through B3 districts and what is permitted and conditional within each of those districts. So why don't we go through and we'll just check a box for what we think would be appropriate or not be appropriate within the Bellas Hinkley Hills area where Buzzards Cove is located. And then we'll look at that and then we'll evaluate whether it does make sense to create a new district or to maintain it within one of the existing districts. So offices, professional or corporate, that's permitted in all of our other districts. I would assume that that would be permitted within that district. And just so that it's very clear, I'm going to try to highlight if I can. That district didn't work. It's okay. Okay. Retail and completely enclosed buildings less than 12,000 square feet. That is permitted in all the other districts. I would assume that would be permitted.
Are we comfortable with the 12,000 square feet as being the maximum size for that area? I don't know how many square feet the buildings are currently at the corner there. You wouldn't have any idea, Tom, would you?
I would, without looking, I'm not sure.
I think that the issue is, and this is what we talked about when we looked at the districts, is you're not saying per acre what size the building is. You're just saying 12,000 square feet.
Mhm.
Well, why can you build 12,000 square feet on a 0.5 acre lot, but if you have a 17 acre lot, you can also only build a 12,000 square feet building? From a
Mhm.
health, safety, and general welfare, that doesn't sound like it makes sense, because you're allowing, if you subdivide a lot, you're going to get a much higher density than if you maintain a large
Well,
lot.
that's true.
Right. So we'll put permitted for now. Again, this is just an initial evaluation. Can you see that, or do you want me to enlarge it?
Like, please.
Retail and completely enclosed building greater than 12,000 square feet, I would assume that that would be not permitted within that area. It's not permitted within the B2 or B3. It's only permitted conditional within the B1. So actually, as it stands now, it is conditional in that district.
I don't think I would want that there.
Agreed.
Personal services in a completely enclosed building, that's permitted in all of the other districts. I don't know why it would not make sense to be there as well.
I do have a question about that one though. Why is there a 12,000 square foot limit on retail, but not on personal services?
How, I guess, how many personal services?
Well, and the only thing I can really come up with is if you think about the what's it called? Not the Magnolia Collective, but the collective on Sharon Center. of the, there are several different personal services within there.
Oh,
There's,
the restaurant.
well, it's got the
beauty
restaurant, it's
salon,
got the
it's
beauty
got the-
salon, it's got chiropractor, it's got massage, it's got salt baths, it's got all sorts of stuff in there. I have difficulty with size, so I don't know if that's anywhere near 12,000. But those are certainly personal services. If someone were to also add in, I don't even know what other personal services you could add in, but you could certainly exceed 12,000 if you wanted to go that route. And I guess I'm just kind of curious why it is capping one but not another. Or why nothing else is capped, but retail specifically is. And I think for the retail side, it makes sense. So we don't have a Home Depot or a Menards going in there. But if we're going to limit one, wouldn't it also be prudent to consider limiting others?
That's a good point. But
Personally, I think it's likely that you're going to see more and more collectives coming together.
Well, and that's what I'm wondering about here is, let's say they combine a restaurant with personal services, because you generally don't see a single use. So I don't know that you'd see a large building of nothing but personal services,
Mhm.
but you might see a building that has multiple
Mhm.
different things within it. Well, that is basically limited by our building sizes that we permit within the district. So that would be, the way that we would control that is, for instance, within the B1 district, only 30% of a lot can be occupied by a building. Or in the B2 and B3, we don't have building only, but we have building and parking at 80%. And that's something else that we're going to want to talk about, I think, with the B2 and B3 at some point. But that's how you would control the building size, is based upon those threshold numbers there, I would say, as opposed to.
But again, when
Here.
we're looking at a 17-acre lot, 80% to include the building and the parking lot is a pretty substantial sized building. And is it any different
If you
to the township? Is it any different to have a 80% surface coverage of that area of a 17-acre lot? Is it any different to the township if it is a retail facility or a conglomerate of other things?
This is why I'm not sure that, that 12,000 is actually a legally sound basis for this separation, because on 17 acres, you can have a 12,000 square feet building, but on a 0.5 acre lot, you can also have a 12,000 square foot building. So take that 17 acres
Mhm.
and instead of having one building, separate it into 10 buildings or
Mhm.
10 different lots
Mhm.
and build a whole multi-use development within there. And that would be perfectly within this. And you could have many buildings that are close to 12,000. In the aggregate, you'd have well over 12,000.
Mhm.
But we just came up with an arbitrary number of 12,000 that has no connection to the lot size.
Not knowing the history of where the 12,000 comes from, I don't know that I necessarily agree with it being arbitrary, but I do agree that it seems a little bit, I don't know, just kind of made up. But that's because we don't know the backstory of it.
But what would be
But
the legal basis
simultaneously,
if we kept going down this route? What would be our legal basis from a health, safety and general welfare standpoint to now limit everything to 12,000 square feet? When on a 17-acre lot, you'd be limited, or on a 0.5. So we're not controlling density.
Mhm. What would the legal basis be for disallowing funeral homes?
Health, safety, general welfare, I don't know. That's
So, and yet that's what we do by laying out all of these different
Mhm.
uses. So and by making that argument, we're basically saying, all right, well, it doesn't matter what we lay out. If we don't have a legal, if we don't have health, safety and welfare, then it doesn't matter what we say is permissible, what's not. It should all be permissible.
I think that there's a big difference between controlling uses in different areas and controlling the size of a building that has no connection to the actual lot. Because we're not affecting density. Right, from a zoning standpoint, we can certainly control the density. We can try to limit how much of a lot is utilized, or in a given area, how much is utilized. But it's very difficult to come up with an arbitrary number that applies to a 17-acre lot or to a 0.5-acre lot.
Dave, you've been on the zoning board before. Do you know why the reason the 12,000 square feet is,
I was on BZA.
or BZA, I'm sorry.
I was trying to remember. I don't remember any particular thing about it, to tell you the truth.
But that's in our book, and I'm very comfortable with leaving it because it's never been challenged. Let's not open up that can of worms. But I'm concerned where this discussion is going is, let's start adding a 12,000 square feet to each other topic. And now that has to go back through legal review. We're gonna get legal opinions
Oh,
on that.
I didn't,
And so I just don't know that I
don't
would
wanna
want to
go
go
there.
there.
I don't think you were going there, were you?
I'm asking why it isn't synchronous, why we're not looking at it across the board. If we're gonna look at it, if we're gonna limit something at 12,000 square feet, why? Why is it being done? And should we continue that? And if we should, why would it only apply to retail and not to other facilities? Would a 12,000 square foot restaurant be acceptable?
Restaurants are permitted. I'm trying to figure out how big 12,000 square feet. I don't know.
That's where I'm
So
struggling
we
as well.
spoke one time about a Dollar General or something. The average store is 6,000 to 7,000 square feet, I think is what we said. So 12,000 is slightly under, if that's the correct number, which is what we looked up last year, it's slightly under 2 Dollar Generals on the average. It's a pretty large space. I mean, the warehouse that we talked about, that front warehouse up on 303 is 38,000 square feet. The First Day School Supply that's existing, that's right
The
next
first
to-
one. Mhm.
that's the, so there, yeah, that would be your perspective.
That's
So it's
38,
roughly a third of that.
1/3.
Mr. Chairman, the average size of a Dollar General is 7,400 square feet. So
Thank you.
So is it maybe confusing because personal services in completely enclosed buildings, because of that phrase, incompletely enclosed buildings, where we don't say that about bank savings and loans, and generally those are in completely enclosed buildings. You know, why the distinction of adding that phrase when restaurant, for instance, well, that could be inside and outside. But do we want to make that distinction in the category of usage?
So actually, we're looking, we're looking further than,
Way
Just-
further than I had anticipated.
we're looking to change the language here.
Well, I mean,
I mean,
that brings up the 12,000, which is a
Right.
good point, because 1A and B specify, but then after number 2, we don't specify in completely enclosed buildings. So
Well, part of that is, so as it's written, we would not allow personal services that are outside space. We would allow restaurants that have an outdoor portion because that's just saying restaurant. But for personal services, we are specifically calling out that personal services in a completely enclosed building is permitted. But if it's not in completely enclosed building, it's not permitted. So you're actually drawing a distinction to what's permitted and not permitted.
I'm okay with number 2 the way it is.
As am I.
I don't have a problem with them. I'm trying to think of a personal service that's outside.
I was as well.
Shooting range,
Well, you could do tanning service.
shooting range.
Is that a
Well, shooting would be
shooting range? Is
entertainment.
that a personal service or is that sporting?
That's outdoor recreation.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's what I would think. I just couldn't think of a personal service and I kept racking my brain. What's outside? Personal service.
I can tell you if we eliminate it, someone will call Inspector Wilson tomorrow and say, so I'm thinking about putting this in and it'll somehow tie into that.
Horse grooming stands.
Personal service.
So we're leaving it for now and
Yes.
moving on and then we'll come back.
Yes.
Perfect.
And
Because this is not
I
going to be
think
the
we
end of the
can-
conversation. This is again, just us starting to work through this. So
Okay.
it'll be a while before we have anything finalized.
okay.
Banks, savings and loan associations and credit unions, those are permitted in all of the other districts. I don't know why they wouldn't be permitted there. From a foot traffic standpoint, I don't see as having higher amount of traffic than retail or personal services. I just don't see a distinction that would justify not allowing it. Lawns, gardens, and nursery sales and services. I actually think this would be a great one for that area.
I did too. Why
and
is that
so-
conditional and not permitted?
Great question. It's so that we have more checks and balances. Remember, when something's conditional, the BZA has more ability to impose restrictions. Maybe it's where the location of the mulch, sites are, because that can be messy, smelly. You might not want to write up against the property line. So the BZA can evaluate it. So it's, I think, one of the big reasons that we put it as a condition. Mr. Marzulli, you're pondering.
Well, I'm being very contrarian and I'm not doing it intentionally. We're saying that it's so that we can have more checks and balances. Well, if we want more checks and balances, why isn't everything conditional? And truthfully,
There's-
I don't think we need checks and balances on all of this stuff. Lawn garden and nursery sales. That would be a great place to have one. I mean, we have one right downtown.
But they're not, none of the mulch storage or the waste
Mhm.
is anywhere near a residential district.
Mhm.
This could potentially be very close to residential district. And so if we don't have that as a conditional, what prevents them from putting that immediately adjacent to the residential district? And part of that is probably that they use a lot more outdoor space. A lot of these other ones are more indoor controlled, so there's setback requirements that come into play. There's building requirements that come into play. For a lawn and garden and nursery, a lot of what they do is outdoor space.
Mhm.
So it's more prone to noise concerns, lighting concerns, smell concerns for that matter.
I mean, right now, we obviously are still having noise and sound concerns from what most would consider a very placid business in that area. So I totally see your point, but simultaneously, I mean, I'm always hesitant to give more checks and balances to the government.
So you're more in favor of much more permitted I mean, you said, why don't we make all of this conditional? But my question back. to
Well,
you is,
that's-
why don't
that's-
we make everything permitted based
Mhm.
upon the lack of checks and balances that you desire?
And if you look at the number of permits permitted
Almost everything's conditional. And I think that that's.
on 67, yeah.
Can I put the C there or do we?
Yeah, I mean, that's fine.
Drive up or drive through windows in association with a permitted or conditional use. Conditional in all other districts, I don't know why we wouldn't allow it there.
I'm okay with that.
Outdoor displays associated with a permitted or conditional use. I think that has to be basically conditional unless you wanted to make it permitted.
I'm having trouble understanding what an outdoor display is. Wouldn't that be more what we've already defined as like a special event?
No, because remember in business districts, a business can only have a certain number of special events, but let's say you have, let's go back to a lawn and garden and nursery, and maybe your outdoor display is some sort of wagon farmers type display of some sort. That could be an outdoor display. It's not a sign. And it's not a special event,
Okay,
right?
yeah, that makes all the sense in the world. I'm just trying to,
I don't know how often that's come up. I don't know that we've had that many outdoor displays, Inspector Wilson.
Well, we have a landscaper up on Boston Road and Western and 30th. And they have big piles of rocks and pavers and so forth. And we get some complaints about that. So it's,
Have you requested them to come in, treated that as an outdoor display and sought a conditional
is
permit
it an
for it?
outdoor display or is it supplies?
Or is it part of the
For their
sales?
business?
Right.
I don't know. I think they would consider an outdoor display because somebody comes in and says, I want to put a new walkway in. Well, we've got different kind of, displays. Paths you can put in, put this big rock beside it. I mean,
Mhm.
they're
It's a little exhibit for them.
I don't know if I agree with that. I think when I think of the outdoor display, I'm thinking of an example of a patio or an example of a,
I think that's what he
Walkway.
was providing. Was
I
it
think
that
he said the stones,
the pallets or just?
Well, they have a palette of,
they have the crate, like wire crate things of the stuff.
No, I would consider more of the walking path with some
Right.
stones to show
An
you
example,
of
right.
what it could look like.
Yeah.
Retaining wall. That's what, I agree with you. So we are on to restaurant. Permitted in all the other districts?
And there's one already there.
Correct. Tavern, bar, and nightclubs, conditional. I actually think that barn might be a nice place for Buzzard's Rooster Caddyshack to move to in there. Gone.
Would fit right in. Caddyshack.
There would be, obviously, if we, I mean, it is conditional, so the BZA could have some say, but the only concern that I would be is, again, that's a 17-acre district. It's a small district. Bars, taverns, nightclubs might have some outdoor lighting, outdoor music, particularly if they have an outdoor area. So we might have similar noise concerns that we're receiving if we did have a bar or nightclub there. That was one of the ones that I thought maybe we wouldn't allow there simply because of the size of that district. And the concern that they're in the valley there, noise travels up, and it would be very likely to interfere with residents. Just something to think about.
So if that's the case, then I'm not disagreeing, then perhaps restaurant would be more conditional.
Right?
Because if they're gonna have a patio,
Because of the
open
noise.
till 11 o'clock at night, people are joking around on the patio, and it's Echo Glen for a reason.
It's a
Good
consideration.
point.
So for now, would we like to make restaurants and taverns conditional and then reevaluate that as we move forward? We're not even sure yet that we're going to create another district. This was just identifying whether there was enough of a
I
difference.
think we should see how much more of a rub there is before we decide whether or not we need to even consider another district.
Mhm. I'll
Put
I'll
conditional.
put them both for C now with red for us to, as two of the possibilities that might need to be reevaluated. Okay. Funeral homes are only permitted in the B1 district. I would assume that we would not want those in that area.
Why?
Because, well, I said I assume because it's not in the B2 or B3.
Mhm.
And I think.
And I'm
that's
kind of
what's
curious
close
why
to
they're
the lines.
not in the B2 or B3.
If you moved them to B2 and B3, I'd say put them in B4 as well, or whatever this is. But if they're not permitted in the B2 and B3, I don't know why they'd be permitted here. They are currently permitted in that district because they're part of the B1 currently.
Mhm.
Well, it's kind of a quiet business. I would say maybe conditional. Low traffic,
Low traffic, did you say?
low traffic.
Low.
Oh, I'm not sure if I agree with funeral homes being low traffic.
Well, obviously they have their peak periods, but
Right.
after that, I mean,
That's true.
well, that's what I'm saying, conditional maybe.
I would assume that this would only be funeral homes, not cremation services, because that would introduce something totally different.
Mhm.
But we only are specifying funeral homes.
I don't even know if you could put a crematorium
That's, no, I wouldn't think you could.
with all the EPA regulations right there in the runoff. I don't think it'd be an option.
So we want to make funeral homes conditional. But it sounds like we might also want to make them conditional for B2, B3. Right now, we're just looking at this one, but that's what I'm hearing as a possibility. Okay. Automobile service stations, they're allowed in the B1 and B2 as conditional. They are not allowed at all in the town center.
I would say not allowed.
With the current definition, I'd say no.
I'm okay with that. Small power equipment is only conditional in the B1 district. I would assume that it would not be permitted within the within this possible district.
I'd agree.
Yeah, I'm good with that.
Churches and other places of worship are conditional in every district. I would assume it would be conditional here as well. Libraries are conditional in all the district. I would assume they're conditional.
Okay with that.
Schools, private or public, conditional in all other districts. I would assume conditional. they're even conditional within residential districts, so I don't know why we would not put them there. Daycare centers, child or adult, I would assume that those would also be conditional there. I think that those are even conditional within residential, although don't quote me on that. Post office is conditional in all other districts, I would assume conditional. Feel free to stop me if I'm moving too fast. Assembly hall, meeting place for fraternal, charitable, social, or other organization is conditional in all their districts. I would assume it would be conditional here. Go ahead.
I don't know that I would consider it conditional in anywhere but B1.
Why did you say that?
Because let's say that I'm just looking, and one of the considerations was to make the old fire station essentially some sort of assembly hall.
Mhm.
And so we don't want an assembly hall. I could understand if you're concerned about the size of it or something, but to say no assembly hall, I mean, assembly halls don't have to be large.
And I'm more thinking, again, from the noise and bordering residential areas.
So we said restaurants and taverns and nightclubs are conditional.
Mhm.
So why would assembly halls not also be conditional? Because I would certainly say a bar and a tavern is more likely to
Much
make
more
noise
Likely, yeah.
than an assembly hall.
Mhm. And I guess the difference in my mind is that the restaurant, bar, nightclub, all that stuff is something that the surrounding residents are likely to utilize. Whereas an assembly hall, meeting place, or fraternal organization, if that is there, it's routinely being used and rarely being accessed or utilized by the surrounding neighbors.
But do we look at whether it's going to be surrounding neighbors or neighbors from 2 miles away that are going to utilize something as part of zoning?
When you're considering the cost benefit, I think it's
But from
worthwhile
a
to
health,
consider.
safety, and general welfare.
Yeah, and so the general welfare for the people nearby to it, I think that's worthwhile.
How much, I don't see the noise issue for a meeting center.
Well, and this is kind of going back to, honestly, it was something that Ray brought up all the time about the wedding bar. You have something like that, and it's a nuisance to the folks around them on a regular basis.
That was a residential district, right? That the wedding barn was in a residential district where someone wanted to basically open a commercial establishment with houses
Absolutely,
right in the this is a business district.
absolutely. It is a business district, but it abuts the residential district. So you put something of that nature in, and you could have significant issues impacting the residential area right next to it.
I don't see the noise factor in this one. I don't see the noise factor for a meeting space.
Okay.
I mean, help me understand where the noise is, if in comparison to a daycare center or a school.
Well, a
Or
daycare
a
center or a
library.
school is certainly not going to be open at 11 o'clock at night with a DJ, with people dancing, with people drinking.
Restaurants.
Restaurant
bars,
and a bar could
taverns
be.
will.
Mhm. I see your point. It's a meeting center, though. It's in an enclosed facility. It's not outside.
Doesn't necessarily say that.
Well, it didn't say,
Mm-mm.
when I was looking at two different ones.
Assembly hall meeting
Yeah.
place.
Okay, assembly hall, meeting place. When I look at that, I think of inside. I don't look at outside.
And I'm thinking more of like a venue, a place where, okay, we're going to have weddings. We're going to have a place for photographs and enjoying yourselves outside.
So I wasn't looking at this assembly hall as a place of where alcohol is served or food is served. And it could be, but that's not how I was looking at it.
And
So,
that's
and
immediately
that's-
where my head went.
Yeah.
So I don't know what
guess
that
you don't
says
get
about me,
people if you
but
don't have alcohol, right? But- I'm not,
I just think that the probability of noise from a tavern, bar, or nightclub is significantly more than assembly hall. I can understand, absolutely, the assembly halls could have an outdoor function. Absolutely, they could have weddings outside at times. They could have some of a reception outside until it starts.
the biggest difference between a restaurant or a nightclub and an assembly hall or a venue is, generally speaking, bar, bunch of really small parties. If one party starts to get out of control, they can be told, you're not welcome here anymore, leave. The rest of the noise, the rest of the patrons aren't raucous. It's this table of 2, this table of 4, this table of 6. Meanwhile, at a wedding, something of that nature, everyone gets riled up and feeds on the energy of one another. And I'm not saying this in a negative way, but it tends to get much more lively and it's more difficult to calm it down.
Could I suggest you leave it as a conditional and the BZA sees fit to require that if they say there's going to be 300 guests or whatever on average, that they're required to have a policeman on premise or some other form of security that could handle that kind of thing. I think we're beating this to death.
And I just don't know why an
Yeah,
outright
you know.
ban for this would make sense.
VFWs and American Legions around the country, I've been in a number of them where they are in residential areas.
Mhm.
Maybe when they first opened up, there was people complaining, but I've never seen any complaining. And many wedding venues do require some form of security.
And a lot of them get complaints.
I agree.
So do a lot of bars.
Chairman Fisher, just to put it out there also is we may want to consider what our liquor licenses look like for those venues as well before we make a decision.
Just for Judy when she's going back. That was Mrs. Cheetah. I'm not familiar with liquor licenses to know whether, does the Liquor Control Agency have certain districts that they allow certain, so we could actually pull up that district and see, and could someone apply for a permit that exceeds what's allowed in that district? Or would they be locked to that district and they can't vary that?
Excellent question, because yeah, we can. County has some regulation.
It's the state of Ohio has a regulation. I believe they have a number per, like for Hinckley, don't quote me, but I think there's like 3 that you can have in Hinckley. because
But
they
you
don't
can
want-
buy, let's say, Buzzards Roost goes out, they could buy that liquor
Yes.
license.
Right.
And that
Correct.
would allow them to do whatever they want within that scope of that liquor license.
Mhm.
And not knowing they vary, so you could have class 5 or I don't even know what they are, but they can vary in what they allow for like a wedding venue. Just something to think about when we're thinking about the zoning, definitely.
Thank you.
And I guess it might actually, that kind of adds knowing that 2 of the licenses are going to be hitting the market.
It still doesn't taverns and bars to me produce more noise, more light generally than an assembly hall. Okay. What's the rest of it? What is everyone else thinking? Keep it as conditional for now? And again, we're just starting this process. Or take it off the table?
Leave it as is.
I'm good with conditional.
Leave it as conditional for now, and I'll mark that one as a red. Is this something that we had a lot of discussion on, so we focus on those areas if we need to come back to it. Indoor recreation is conditional in all other districts. I would assume it could be
It's permitted in
correct.
B1, correct?
Thank you. There was some discussion that this would be a good recreational area. So one of the considerations is we could make it permitted within this area if we wanted to focus it that direction. But again, once you do that, you don't know what the indoor recreation will be. If you make it permitted, it will be much easier for them to go through without a checks and balances.
And knowing that we decided that, or that we've said, we haven't decided that it would be good for a recreation area. I wouldn't be opposed to being permitted for indoor recreation.
I'm good with that as well.
What about indoor firing range?
I'm still good with that.
Just making sure.
What about scene 75 that's indoor and has a bar?
Well, then that becomes a
That's
tavern,
fine,
bar,
yeah.
nightclub.
If you have a conditional, gives you a little more.
Would that
Ability.
fall under a bar though, because there's liquor?
Recreation.
How do you, when you have a mixed use building, are you looking at each one of those individual uses? So are you saying, look, you're building this big building and part of it's being used for recreation, part of it's being used for a bar. You have to confirm that both of those uses would be
Yeah, I
permitted
mean,
within their
you know,
condition,
like-
correct?
You have a plaza that's divided up. I mean, you're
It's the same
looking at
thing.
the individual business each time, yeah.
What if it's a single business like Scene 75 that does 4 different things? They have indoor entertainment, indoor recreation, go-kart facilities, basketball hoops, a bar, maybe a restaurant. Are you looking at their primary? Are you looking at each use?
That's a good question. I would think you'd look at the primary and hopefully it has conditional use, because I don't think I've had that since I've been here, but we're both industrial and business. We're looking at the individual units.
So for now, we're leaning towards permitted for indoor for. Okay. Outdoor recreation is conditional everywhere. I would assume that we would want conditional here for that.
And it's not conditional in B3.
Oh, sorry, that's wrong on the, I must have a version that I was working off of before. Thank you. Dwelling units above the first floor are only conditional within the B3 district. And I would assume that we would not want them in this district. We remove short term. Those were old too. Hospitals, medical clinics, urgent care facilities, ambulance and emergency, I would assume that we would not want those in this district. Senior citizen residential facilities. This would be this actually might be one that we'd want to consider there. Because it would be much more closely related to the
Residential.
Residential.
Mhm.
Those be detached or attached?
I was gonna
units?
ask, what is the definition here?
Yep.
of the
I mean,
Senior
you know,
residential
do we-
facility.
Right, do we define it as just detached units, so it's more residential like? You know,
Or is it another,
It fits within the,
Apartment
it can be either. If, as it currently is written, it's a senior housing, then you would refer to the section on senior housing. That would not fit here is currently because of the current infrastructure there, though.
I'm sorry, what was it?
That sort of development would not fit there because of the infrastructure. It doesn't have sewer, it doesn't have water. So at least as it, based upon the current infrastructure, if they were to do a senior citizen residential facility there, I would assume there would be much more like a nursing home type facility, a Hinkley Elementary type facility there, something where it'd be a large building with the septic plant on site and some sort of well on site, given the current infrastructure. It's not to say that that infrastructure won't change, but that would be what I would imagine right now.
so maybe not. So maybe not.
So are we back to leaving it off?
You mean leaving it as it is? Or
Well-
removing the condition?
That's a confusing question as well. As it is, currently it's conditional because it's
Right.
B1. And what I'm I meant currently there's a blank in that spot. So as is would be blank, which means it would not be permitted. The other option would be conditional or permitted.
So I'm doing my own little chart, so.
So there's
you
nothing in that
created
chart
one.
right now. It's
Yeah.
blank.
Right.
So as it stands right now, it's not permitted.
Well, I think it should be. I'm not sure if I'm going, leaning towards conditional or permitted, though. Anyone else?
I'm leaning to leaving it out.
I'm leaning towards conditional. Just because, again, I think that that's a fantastic site for it relative to the metro parks and relative to the other residential communities. It would be very quiet with very little light pollution. Marzullo? We'll mark it red regardless. So we just need a letter for now. What are you leaning towards?
Without any sort of density verbiage, I don't think we can do that to the township.
Okay, we'll leave it out. Signs permitted. Similar use would also be, similar use finding would also be permitted, I would assume. So pulling back out a little bit. Where do we see differences? There were some differences relative to the other districts. I think predominantly the differences were in the restaurant, tavern, bar. Otherwise, I think we could put it within within the B2, not B3, because B3 has the dwellings above the first floor. But the considerations would be, does the distinctions that we might want to see there, which are really related to restaurants and taverns, is that enough? I guess it's actually just with respect to restaurants, because taverns and bars are conditional. So just restaurants would be the only one that we made conditional as opposed to permitted. So the only reason to justify to me having a new district is if we thought that that was so important to have a resident restaurant be conditional that we need to create another district. Otherwise, I'd suggest we just put it within the B2 district.
Did we not also include funeral homes in there?
No, oh, you're right. You're right, conditional. So then there would be 2 items.
And the senior.
And the senior,
Oh, because, yeah, I forgot.
and
seniors.
the indoor recreation. So I mean, there's quite a
Yeah,
few
fair.
differences.
So do we want to look into a 4th district? Is that where the wind's blowing? The benefit to 4th district is also, just as a reminder, we can look at lot areas and lot requirements for that area that are distinct from the lot areas and size requirements and building setbacks of the other districts. So there are some other benefits to it. If for 17 acres it warrants a 4th business district.
Would it make sense to involve the residents in the business and say, here's the list, what do you think should be in it?
I think it would certainly,
And would there be enough people living or working there that would take part?
there's only 3 people living and working if you're actually talking about within the district.
Only 3 people?
Within that district
That own,
that own.
As
properties
opposed to the
within that
folks that-
district.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, okay.
surrounded.
So I would imagine we could get a fairly
Great survey.
quick survey of, right.
Well, do we want to,
I mean, in all fairness, if we do move forward, it's gonna go to open hearing anyways. So we'll get that feedback.
And we won't be
Long
sending a
before.
text amendment for many months. So
Yeah.
we'll have this
This
sitting
year.
here for a while and then we'll go through the whole process. So this was just one topic for us to try to work on, get some resolution to, in the direction that we want to head so that we can start to manipulate the book accordingly.
We also said automobile service stations, correct? Did we capture that as not allowed?
Yes.
All right.
Sorry, I didn't flag them as I went. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just looking at it, want to make sure.
Yep.
so I would just keep it as its separate column. It sounds like there's a,
It seems like there's a pretty substantial difference.
Yeah, I mean, it
between that and
seems-
the others.
Okay. We'll go through with that for now, and then we'll see what the public has to say about it. And, but for now, we'll tentatively plan on the 4th district and work through it accordingly. Good.
All right.
Before I move on to the next topic, I will let, if there's any public comment pertaining to this topic. Go ahead, Mr. Spellman.
So have we answered what I think is a more fundamental question of, do we want this to even be a business district as opposed to a residential district? And I only ask that, we seem to have spent a lot of time, last year we spent a lot of time on this, we're spending more time on it this year. And we jumped right into defining uses. And to me, that district itself sits in a rather interesting location and seems very out of place given the surrounding areas. So I'm just curious if we've answered that, fundamental question first before we proceed. With things. So that's maybe just one comment. I have other comments, but I will allow a response.
So at least in my mind, for now, it was closed for residential because we went through the whole process last year. We heard from public comments. And so to rehash the same discussion this year, have the same public comments this year, just seemed inappropriate that had been decided. We voted on as a commission. We heard from the public. We heard from the planning commission. We heard from the trustees. And it was decided that didn't make sense as residential at that time. So I don't know that there's been any circumstances that have changed in 3 months that would justify us restarting it back at resident, looking at it again for it doesn't make sense as residential.
Well, I can say that at least from my vote perspective last year to keep it as a business district, that wasn't made because that's how I felt it should be. It was made because I don't feel that at the time we had enough information and just thought behind how to proceed, in that area. And so instead of changing it in a rash decision, just tabled it or effectively let it remain as is. Purely an opinion on things. It does, again, my opinion, it seems to just not fit business district in that area, especially with the uses that you just talked about up here, does not fit that area whatsoever. If this commission is intent on making it a business, keeping it a business district, my personal opinion would be to see it become a separate district to give you a lot more flexibility beyond just the permitted and conditional uses. And then my last comment on that would be to make all uses conditional, just to give us the most amount of latitude in terms of keeping any use harmonious with that particular area.
All uses within that district or all uses within all districts?
So no, just in that district.
If anyone else wants to respond to Mr. Spellman's first comment in particular, I'd be very interested to hear if anyone else has anything to say on that.
We all voted
Yeah.
last year. So I preferred to have it stay residential, but that wasn't the
In fact, I think it
outcome.
was a split vote. And now you're flip-flopping your vote. It would have gone the other way.
Well, I'm not flip-flopping any vote. My comment was I at the time voted not to change it because I felt we were rushing into things. My personal opinion, and by the way, it's a little different sitting over on this side of the table. I have a weird feeling, but no, my opinion is just in listening and in looking and having gone through that process last year, it feels like that ought to be a residential area, not a business area. I'm just throwing it out there. We can hash through and say, no, we've made our decision and move on. And my feelings are heard either way.
I absolutely agree. When we started out last year, I thought that it made perfect sense as a residential district. I don't understand why it was not a residential district, but for the fact that there was some existing business there. But we heard from the surrounding neighbors. We had the opportunity to hear from anyone within that area or around that area that wanted to speak. We had very little public input, but we did have a lot of public input from the homeowners within that district that were very vocal about they want to keep this a business district. So I felt like we didn't have enough voices coming from the other side to suggest that this should be residential. The other point that we didn't have, that it felt rushed, I feel like we had 5 or 6 discussions on this. And I felt like we had a very robust discussion as to whether it should be business or residential. And I don't know what another 2 or 3 meetings would have resulted in, because going all the way through planning services, I thought that this was going to be residential. And it wasn't until we heard from the public comments that it finally changed the way I looked at it. That was at least how I perceived last year's progression of this process.
The feedback was skewed, certainly, and like everything zoning, the feedback is always going to be skewed. The majority of people will be complacent, right? And the people that are affected showed up. I heard a lot of, I should say a lot, I heard 2 or 3 of the owners talk about business uses that they, planned on doing for the last, 2 or 3 decades, haven't got there yet. So perhaps one of these days we'll get there. At least one of the uses would have been not permitted to begin with, not even conditionally permitted. So again, I'm not beating that horse on it. Just seems like, I don't know. Feel like the question, I don't feel like there's closure on that question.
I agree. Within 17 acres, I don't know how you control the noise or you control the light. It's just too little of an area to adequately prevent some of that from happening. But those residents had the opportunity to speak and wanted to keep it business. And so that's, for me, the closure is we heard from those residents, the ones that were most affected by it, and they wanted to keep business. So we'll look at it and we'll consider what sorts of businesses, because right now we're in our broadest spectrum of businesses, our B1 district. So maybe we'll limit it to try to control that a little bit better. But I just didn't see the appetite to move it to a residential district.
Well, I know my comment was, give it a try when it was suggested, but if it doesn't work out, then look at making a B4 district. And, and up to that point, we had not heard from the property owners, and, those are the people with the greatest interest at stake, because it's property they own. So.
I certainly want to be sensitive to the property owners. Don't get me wrong in any of this conversation. We let this township get driven by individual property owners, we perhaps could end up with more of what we have going on in the township today. And I look at that area, in my opinion, I look at that area, it's a business district and surrounded very tightly a residential, a park-like setting.
I agree.
And we have an opportunity as a zoning commission to step back and say, before that thing becomes inundated, who knows? I don't know what the future holds, but before it becomes inundated with more congestion, more noise, you have an opportunity to step back and say, what's best for the township? And in this conversation of we should make another business district in this township, is that really driving rural character, especially in that area? And are we at a short supply of business districts elsewhere in the township? Just things to consider in the conversation.
With response to that, we kind of have to back the truck up a little bit. It's not that we would be creating another area of business within the township.
Correct.
It is currently a business district. Realistically, what we've been discussing this evening is, all right, what are appropriate business uses in an existing business district? We are not saying, let's create another business district, right on 303. And at 303 and River, why not? That's not what we're doing. What we were trying to do is say, all right, we discussed this for months on end. And the feedback we received, whether the majority of the board agreed with it or not, was this needs to remain a business district. There was one resident who made a very solid point of, did anybody actually request this? And frankly, that's a pretty solid point that I had not considered. It really isn't our role to come in and say, we're just going to yank this from you. Especially when the feedback that we did receive was, I've been planning on opening a business here. Yes, one of them was not allowed, was an impermissible business. But we talked about it for months and months. And now what we're trying to do is say, all right, the appetite to change it to a strictly residential area isn't there. So what does make sense? What is best for the township in this pre-existing business zone? And do I think that it should have ever been a business district? Personally, no. But it is. And so we deal with it.
Thank you, Matt. And with all due respect, it's absolutely this commission's business to look at every aspect of this township and to make sometimes decisions that aren't, going to be widely accepted by a landowner. And so it's absolutely our job, our role to scrutinize that. In this particular case, you're right, it's an existing business. And I'm not insinuating that, we're going to expand the business district. But I believe it's our role as a zoning commission to look at that area and say, nobody seemed to be able to come up with the real history of how that became a business district.
Correct.
And more than one person on this zoning commission, including the alternates, feels that it should have never been a business district. And here we are talking about leaving it as such. And it doesn't have to be something, zoning doesn't have to be prompted by a landowner or a resident. Zoning changes can be prompted by the zoning commission. And that's all I'm saying is it's our role, it's our function to look at and to scrutinize everything zoning related and ask those tough questions. Should it be or shouldn't it be?
I absolutely agree with you. I think the thing that I'm stuck at is we had 6 meetings, I think, on this topic. And what new information has come to light, or what has happened, or what dynamic has changed that's going to shift this conversation so that we're not going through 6 more meetings of this, only get back to the same point of it won't be residential. I just haven't seen anything that's come out that makes us think, wait a minute, now maybe the momentum's there for residential, whether it's within the zoning commission or whether it's with the outside public or some other external factor. I've just seen nothing that suggested that there's been a change. So what, I was advocating for the residential district. I wholeheartedly agree with everything you just said, but we went through this.
And frankly, the risk of doing nothing, I think, is greater than the risk of creating a new category of business district for it.
The risk of doing nothing is
The risk of keeping
Oh,
it in.
yeah,
the B1.
absolutely, absolutely.
Right. So we're trying to mitigate the potential harm while recognizing that the appetite wasn't there for residential.
Now, and it's very possible that if we do get to a text amendment phase, that when we start going through the open hearing, then everybody in Echo Glen and everyone in all the surrounding areas say, no, this should be residential. At which point we're okay. Now what do we do?
Right.
Because we've heard from the landowners. Now we've heard from all the surrounding landowners who are unified.
Right.
But without any of that, we're doing what we can only see is, I mean, you've been up here, you know, and it's not easy.
I've been part of this conversation and here
Yeah,
I am
exactly.
sitting on the other side saying, hey, you should think about this,
Yeah.
Chairman. No, it's not.
I love it.
It does, but there's something that eats away a little at my gut when, and I'm not gonna do this, but if I said by a show of hands, who thinks that should be a residential area? We all know the number of hands that are gonna go up, right? I'm not gonna put anyone on the spot, but boy, something seems hypocritical about that.
Well, what we can do, and we've all been listening to you, Bill, and we do agree with you, right? I voted residential. I would raise my hand, but when we started this process tonight, we were looking at these 3 districts and we had a 4th column to look at where we disagreed, right? But in my mind, that's what we did. However, in my mind, if we're going to create a whole different district, I'm going to go back through the ones that we said, does it fit? And I'm going to say, looking at it in a different perspective than what I did when we came in here. So there's a couple of them that I'm gonna say, no, I don't think it goes there.
Yeah.
So the exercise we did earlier is different when I came in than what we're gonna do now if we now say this is another district.
Yeah.
So, I foresee more limitations.
And it's quite possible that with some public input, that list can change even
Absolutely.
more limitations.
Absolutely.
And I think it's a good exercise to go through each one of these to see where the differences are and what is it that would be acceptable there and what would not. And we got to start somewhere. So,
Frankly, it wouldn't be a terrible exercise to do in all of the districts.
Absolutely. One of the things I'd like to do is, we can look at the tables again. We started to do that last year. What we did not look at last year at all really was the area requirements and the building setback requirements. And so we mirrored the B2 and the B3, for instance, but the B2 now allows 80% parking in buildings on a lot. And maybe that could be smaller because that's no longer town center. That's not where we want the high density. So we can reduce that down to not allow 80% of the lot to be buildable. Those are things I certainly would like us to do as part of this text amendment. And as part of that, we can review this again. I'm just a person, I like to get pen to paper. I like to give us a starting point, something to work off of, and then we'll continue to refine that as we go along. And so this exercise was great for putting something down. And then, we'll start going through some of those other topics, then we'll come back and we'll revisit this again and work our way through and reevaluate what makes sense. And by then we'll certainly have had some public comment opportunities. Perfect. Let me go ahead. Come up and state your name, please, and address.
Good evening. My name is Doug Mainzer. We're a property owner at 1727 Hinkley Hills Road. And what I would like to say this evening is, when considering outdoor recreation, I think we need to consider the safety and golf balls as a nuisance. I would also like to request that the Hinckley Zoning Commission amend zoning of prohibited nuisances to include projectiles, whereas such projectiles from any business or person engaging in outdoor activity or recreation be required to maintain all projectiles within the limits of their own property, such as no harm, damage, or risk be passed on to another property, person, or to put the public at risk. These projectiles should include golf balls, which have been documented by the Hinckley Police Department to cause personal injury and property damage.
Everyone has been received your email that you received, so those have been all forwarded to them. I also have, as part of my chairman's report, topics that I received that will evaluate whether we want to add in for conversation as part of that. So
Thank you.
thank you. It's already 8:18, so I don't think we're going to have time to really discuss the other two. I had thought that we would get through at least term consistency. I don't think we're going to, but at least to give us a little bit of information on it. I know Inspector Wilson's here and he had a few points that he wanted to bring up. So in case he's not here at the next meeting, I'd like to give him the opportunity to speak. Inspector Wilson, if you'd like to, on this topic. And then I have one other item on this topic, and then we'll close off the new business and move to the chairman's report. Does that sound reasonable?
Sounds good.
sure.
Well, just briefly, at the BZA meeting, there was a question brought up about floor area versus living space. And my comment tonight is when I figure a schedule, a fee schedule on a new home or a accessory building, whatever it is, I'm basically looking at the footprint. And if it's a new home, and well, almost any building, I go by the architectural plans. The architects put on those plans how big the first floor is, how big second floor is, or how big the barn is. And I check that and go with that. Now, sometimes architects don't put on porches and steps and things like that. So then I add that to the picture. And I know on page 44 of your book, it talks about living space, I believe. And I think what that's referring to is to make sure we measure correctly the minimum house that's allowed in Hinckley. And right now, it's 1,280 square feet. So that's awfully small. Most of the living rooms that are being built today are much bigger than that. But I bring it to your attention because something, I mean, I know that this committee talks about how the code reads and so forth. So the other comment I'll make on how we figure the fee schedule, somebody's going to build a new house, you have to have a zoning permit from us before it can go to the county. And then the county looks at that, and our zoning department has to agree with the county. And once in a while, I'll get a call from the county and say, explain this, you know, and so I know that they're looking to make sure that the fees they charge are in line with the footprint that we're looking at, but that's how they look at it too, as a footprint. So that was my only comment on that, that as you're looking at the language, we have some language that says floor area and some that says living space. And I don't think it does say footprint in there. It was just the way I was trained by the county and by my former inspector to figure that fee.
Perfect, thank you. So just as background, we have living area, which is in several places, page 44, 61, and 88. We have living space, which is only a definition on page 10. And then we have floor area in several places. Most notably, when you look at this yourselves independently, look at page 116, which talks about a business area floor area. As far as I can tell, which is related to site plan. As far as I can tell, most areas floor area is defined within the section. So there's a floor area for calculations of parking, floor area for residential, both the R1 and the R2. But for business on page 116, it refers to floor area as well. I don't have a control F, so I can't find it quickly, but it's there somewhere because I found it. It had to do with site plan.
Paragraph B3.
Thank you. Any existing or previously approved development meeting the criteria of B1 or B2 above that proposes to alter, construct, or otherwise modify a use or site, including expanding the floor area of the permitted use. That's just not defined anywhere what floor area is for purposes of business. So that's just something that we'll want to look at as we move forward with this. Otherwise, I think living area and living space are synonyms. So we likely can just replace living space in the definition of living area. But we do have to look a little bit at floor area. And then as Inspector Wilson was saying, for his calculations for fees, he doesn't actually use floor area. He uses this completely different term. I think you called it floor plan, because he calculates part of the basements. So because basements can include some living space, and our floor area and our living space and floor area definitions both exclude basements from that calculation. So just as a little insight as you work on this, regarding institutions of human care and family homes versus group homes, which are all discussed in our code, I will send to each of you this U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development and U.S. Department of Justice joint statement regarding state and local land use laws and practices as they apply to group homes. It gives a brief definition and also explains what we can and cannot do with respect to group homes, family homes. Institutions of family care, I did find a few, and I'll scan these and provide these to you, a few definitions of institutions for human care. It's a quite broad definition, so it surprises me that it's a conditional use within our districts, residential districts, because it includes buildings or groups of buildings providing health, medical, or rehabilitation services to individuals such as hospitals, nursing and residence homes, orphanages, and rehabilitation. So it's a very expansive thing that could be within a residential district based upon this. They also, what I liked about a couple of these is they also provided definitions for rehabilitation homes and residential care facilities, a residential care facility being basically a residential home. So I liked finding some zoning language that talked about all three of those basically to help us guide how we should define things. So just something to look at that I'll provide to each of you for the next meeting as we work through that. The term consistency section will be our topic that we'll focus most closely on next meeting. And then we'll go through a couple more topics. And then once we kind of get a collection, we'll go through them all again and reevaluate the stuff we've done today, plus other things, if that's okay. Chairman's report, similar use finding. Sunbelt Tools applied for a similar use. They're a rental equipment company. We allow business construction construction equipment within the industrial district. And so they ask for them to be considered a similar use to that. This would be the first time the BZA has reviewed the similar use, because as you remember, we moved it to the BZA for evaluation as opposed to us. I think they did a great job. They had about a 30-minute discussion and agreed that Sunbelt is a similar use, so they're able to proceed forward. I think they're still evaluating whether they need to obtain any variances or not.
So that's correct.
So that would be their next step. They'll go back to the BZA for variances if they do need any. Otherwise, we'll see them at a preliminary site plan, assuming this moves forward. Arborcrest replat. You saw probably that there's a very large parcel in the back of Arborcrest that they're requesting to have replatted to divide it into 3 sublots. It's currently 1 sublot. It extends all the way to Bellis Road. So they want to have 2 cul-de-sac lots and then another lot that comes directly off of Bellis Road. So that will go before the Planning Commission because it is a replat of subdivision. Mr. Marzulli, you had a question?
It's not a conservation.
Correct. So the lots within the subdivision will be a little over 2 acres, I think. And then the other lot will be much larger that's coming directly off of Bellis. I know that their HOA has provided comments opposing this for a variety of reasons. From a zoning perspective, there was really no reason for the zoning inspector to have any oppositions to this. They are seeking our comments. So if you do have any comments, just go ahead and send them to Suzanne. And then I'll provide some paperwork. According to our organizational minutes, we can elect to have someone attend this meeting of the Planning Commission, which will be their their April meeting, excuse me. If anyone would like to go, this is not something that I think we necessarily have to have a representative there for, but certainly if someone wants to be there as a representative, that would be fine.
What's the date on that?
Do you know when the Planning Commission? I didn't print out their calendar for
So the Guiding
2023.
Planning Commission?
Yeah,
Is it April?
their April meeting.
April 5th.
April.
Does anyone have a desire to attend? If so, we'll appoint you as the liaison. No?
Well, at this point, I don't know yet. I might just go for curiosity.
Does anyone think that we need to have a representative there from the zoning commission?
Well, I think if somebody has comments, we should have some representation, but when you say you're asking for comments, are those personal comments or are those comments represented in the zoning commission?
So if we appoint you to go on behalf of the zoning commission, you'll be speaking on behalf of the zoning commission,
Right.
not as personal
Right,
comments.
so I'm not looking to go necessarily, but if somebody does have comments to give you that would be representative, then somebody would need to go.
The only thing I think that might be applicable is the verbiage we have that we instituted for conservation developments, where all sublots must be accessible through a main thoroughfare. Specifically, it's specifically tied to conservation developments, but I know the intent was to expand that to just all PUDs. I don't know that we got there. But I think
the other thing would be that final lot, while it would be, I guess, considered part of the subdivision, it's a replat. So it's basically a lot directly off of, I mean, it's just an empty lot that's no longer part of the subdivision, right? The reason that works for conservation is because as part of the calculation process, they have to be tied into a single road. But if you have 75 acres and you want to subdivide it so that 4 of those lots are just coming off of Stony Hill, for instance, and the rest of the lots are connected to the main road, you're permitted to do that. There's nothing that we can do to stop you from having those 4 lots connected off of Stony Hill, as long as you have the frontage requirements.
yeah, the only difference is that the actual site review and everything that went through, it was, all right, this is what we came to you with, and
Right. And that's why
Now we're
they
changing
do
the
have to go through a replat because of that.
and the reason for that verbiage, it's not because of it was because, all right,
It was because someone was pulling a large lot off of a different road, correct?
correct, but it was still supposedly part of it
Subdivision.
and paying their HOA fees and all that.
Yeah. If you want to provide comments, just get them to Suzanne. I think we have until the 15th or so of the month. So just try to by the 10th of the month to provide comments, and then we'll compile them and send something. Otherwise, I won't send anything written comments to.
Has the homeowners association expressed why they are opposed? Too much traffic, too much noise, too much dirt?
Trustee Augustine, do you want to speak at all on that?
I received an email from the HOA president with regard to their concerns. It's my understanding, and I put this in my comments to the planning commission, that they have been trying to contact the new homeowners who are supposed to contact the HOA before they do anything with the lot. And furthermore, there was a previous planning commission report that dates back to 2011 that shows that, bear with me, I have to find it here on my documents. It says in staff comments, I believe it's number Number 3, if approved, sublot 48 will have access to both Arborcrest Drive and Babcock Road. The applicant has indicated that the subject parcel is to be used as a nature preserve. Staff suggests that access should be limited to one of the 2 streets. In the alternative, the interior layout of the parcel should be designed so that it prohibits or at least discourages through traffic. Because as you know, our comprehensive plan is very specific on having little pods of neighborhoods, not through streets.
So this is where they got, I assume the guy died who carved all those things.
I don't know the specifics of that. I apologize.
It was
That's
sold
all right.
though.
But it-
I'm sorry.
It was sold. It's a
Yeah,
different person.
okay. I know he was sick.
So those were the things that I submitted to Medina County Planning Commission on behalf of the HOA president.
That's fine.
The next topic is, as most of you probably know, there has been a request for annexation of the corner where Buzzards Roost is, where Discount Drug Mart was proposed to go. That doesn't have any impact on us yet. The BZA did look at that and did provide a conditional use for a drive-through. So it's nothing that we have to worry about. The one thing that I do want to just, as from a zoning perspective, remind you is that for annexation, the property has to be continuous that they're seeking to annex. And so what we'll want to watch is if this property does get annexed, the next one down the road on 303 is the senior housing, followed by a couple vacant, well, a couple of lots that very well might go business or they'll attempt to go business if those lots are ever sold. And we got a commercial space, a business space next to the senior housing. So when we look at what we want to do in that section, we really want to start looking at what Brunswick is doing and potentially consider trying to mirror that to discourage property owners from seeking annexation. Because for instance, if we start restricting what can happen by the senior housing, then senior housing has an incentive to annex, and then we're moving it down further down 303. So it's just something for us to start to think about, and we'll see where this goes. And if the annexation, doesn't make it through, we're in a very different position. But if it does go through, we'll want to start looking at what Brunswick is doing with their zoning along that line and try to consider matching it to avoid encouraging other landowners to seek annexation. It's again, only those properties that are continuous to a Brunswick property that we have to worry about.
Do we know who submitted the request?
The property owners?
Woolman.
No,
No.
it's been sold. It's like West 130th something LLC. It's an LLC that just owns that property. Before I do the next, well, I'll just announce the next regular zoning commission meeting is April 6th, 2023. We received 2 emails regarding future items for discussion, one being related to nuisances. That was the topic that we just had. Now, I think that's a topic that we probably do want to discuss as part of these text amendments. So I'll leave it, it won't appear on the new business section yet because I try to limit how many items we have on the new business at any one time to those that I hope to accomplish that night. But I do think that we'll look into the nuisance section as part of this package of text amendments. Did you have something to say, Mr. Marzulli? You were looking at me like you were ready to speak.
No.
Perfect. And the other one related to senior housing, and specifically multi-dwelling units within senior housing. Senior housing is allowed within the conditionally permitted within the B1, B2 district. This is a topic that I think we're going to want to wait to see what happens with the annexation on, because I really think that will guide what that looks like. So that one I'll also keep on our set of new business, and we'll see where it comes in the next few months, and then where we are in terms of text amendments, and then we'll evaluate whether that topic is a topic that we want to proceed with discussion with or not.
Last month, you also mentioned conservation developments. Are they still on the list somewhere?
We'll discuss those. We'll discuss automobile service stations. These were just new topics I wanted to briefly just
Gotcha.
introduce that we have. But as I said, I don't want to, we used to have a subject matter list, and it just had a running list of items that we wanted to discuss. But I didn't think I thought that was doing a disservice to the public, because they might be very interested in item 7 on that list and then
Gotcha.
come to a meeting and then realize, wait a minute, you're 4 months from item 7. So I'm trying to keep the new business at just the topics I hope to have some level of discussion on. But absolutely,
Got
it's
it.
on there.
Okay.
I have nothing else. Ms. Crew,
I don't have anything.
Mr. Marzullo,
Pretty good.
Mr. Manley,
Nothing.
Ms. Engelmann,
Nothing?
trustee,
No, thank you.
trustee, Mr. Wilson. Members of the public. No. Perfect. At this time, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn at 8:39 PM.
So moved.
Moved by Marzullo,
Second.
seconded by Crew. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.